Hey, it's April 26th, and we find ourselves again in the Psalms, specifically Psalms 73, 77, and 78. Now, one of my favorite songs of all time is called Tell Me Again by Jeff Moore and the Distance. It's the story about a boy who was faithfully taught about the works of God in Sunday school. But in high school, he's confronted with some anti-biblical views. His response? Tell me again what God has done in the past, so that I will not forget. Because you see, when we forget what God has done in the past, it becomes all too easy to turn away from Him in the present. These three Psalms recount what God has done and taught Israel in the past. It gives them examples of the consequences that forgetting God leads to. He implores them not to repeat the mistakes of the past by remembering what God has already done. Psalm 73 acknowledges that God is with His people, but even we may be tempted to think that the wicked have a better life than us. However, verses 16 and 17 say, "But when I thought how to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task, until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end." You see, everything the wicked have can and does vanish in a moment, and their eternity is apart from God. But the righteous are with God both now and forever. Psalm 77 tells us that remembering how God has worked in the past gives us strength to endure today. This psalm specifically reminds us about the crossing of the Red Sea. And Psalm 78 begins by reminding Israel of Moses' charge in Deuteronomy 6 to teach God's word to their children, so that their children can teach their children, and so on. Verse 7 says, "So that they should set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. So," verse 8, "that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God." How stubborn and rebellious were their forefathers? Well, they didn't enter the promised land the first opportunity they had. Why? Because they quickly had forgotten God's power demonstrated in the 10 plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night that God was leading them with ever since they left Egypt. So they wandered for 40 years, forgetting how God had provided water from a rock twice. They complained about having no food, so God provided them with manna every day. They complained about the manna, so God gave them meat like they asked. God would punish their unbelief and sin on multiple occasions, but they would forget and keep on sinning. 40 years later, the new generation trusted God. They conquered the promised land because God drove out the nations before them, and they got to settle down in a good land. But it just took one generation to forget all that God had done. That following generation repeatedly worshipped false gods, so God punished them with enslavement to other nations, but delivered them with the judges when they cried out and turned to Him. And now God had chosen King David, a righteous man, to lead His people by example. So, what can we take away from today's passage? Well, forgetting what God has done in the past leads to sin in the present. My prayer for us today is that we remember all that God has done in the past, so that we would not be tempted to turn away from Him, realizing that the God of the past is still God today. If you haven't done so already, please download our Through the Bible reading plan at AsperiaCommunityChurch.org/throughthebible. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.